Hey, my name is Steven and welcome to the Curvy Woodworking Shop. In this video, I'm going to give you a breakdown of how I constructed my latest guitar build. It's a Gibson Les Paul style guitar made with a lot of curvy features throughout the entire thing. I have a curly walnut base, a Wenge fretboard, and for the neck I combined Paduck and black limba. Okay, so to start off this build, same thing I did with the Gibson SG. I'm going to take that PDF image and I'm going to glue it on top of a 3/8 piece of plywood. I'm then going to cut up the 3/8 plywood on a bandsaw and shape it on the sander. Use a router to perfectly transfer that template onto this character piece of wood. While I'm cutting this on the bandsaw, I'm going to stay approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the template, and then I'll let the router do the remainder of the work afterwards. While I have this template on top of the piece of wood, this is also a perfect opportunity to transfer over the markings for all the knobs and dials throughout the guitar. I'm also going to be bulking out material using the Forstner bit. I'll show you in detail how I do that later on in the video and what the benefit of that is. I'm going to take individual passes on the router. I'll drop it approximately 1/4 of an inch at a time. I don't want to put too much strain on the router and on the character piece of wood. Whenever you see that nice texture in the wood, it's susceptible to snapping or breaking underneath the pressure. So take your time with it, make sure you do it right. Now with the shape of the guitar complete, I'm going to put some markings on there and I'm going to start to shape away to have a nice curvature along the edge. Okay, so to shape the guitar head, I'm going to be using the Shinto rasp. So you can see the serrated teeth on both sides. These ones are more aggressive and these ones are less aggressive. Now, when I shape the guitar head, I'm going to be taking individual pass-throughs and I'm going to be feeling with my hand to make sure I keep that curvature consistent. I'm going to take long sweeping motions just so that I don't have any gouges occurring in a location. So now, take a couple hours, use the sweeping motion, and then on the interior curves, you're going to be using a radius rasp. This one isn't as good as the Shinto rasp, but it still does the job with the same methodology. Okay, so now when you're removing a bulk of material from a solid piece of wood, you use the plunge router so that you can drop the depth and then you can trace that template image on there perfectly. But the problem is you don't want to put too much strain on that router. So before you use the router, you're going to take off the bulk of the material with a Forstner bit. So you're just going to keep within 1/8 of what you need to remove, take it away with the Forstner bit, and that will alleviate the stress that will go on the router. In case you're wondering why I'm drilling a hole in the back of the guitar, this is going to hold the electrical component that'll house the adjustable knob that'll switch between the two pickups from treble to rhythm. Okay, so I'm going to be cutting out this section. That's going to house all the dials for the front of the guitar. So to get a perfect mirror image, I made myself a template, and then on top of that, I made myself a piece that'll fit right in that template. For those wondering how I know when to stop the drill press, I actually have a dial on the side and you can see me looking up while I'm using the drill press. That gives me a reference marker of how deep I'm going with the Forstner bit. Okay, now I have to drill a channel between these two openings and the two pickup openings on the front. So to fasten the caps to the guitar, I'm going to start off by drilling a 1/8 of an inch hole, and then I'm going to be using this threading bit so that I can insert a couple of brass screws that'll hold it all together. Using all those markings, I drilled through the template onto this piece of wood. This is just future accommodation for the bridge and the neck support. Okay, so for the neck, I'm going to be using black limba and paduck and a laminate style pattern. And then for the fretboard, I'll be using a piece of wenge I have left over from the last build. So both of these pieces of wood are exotic and they are very nice, especially when you clean them up. The paduck is eventually going to lose that orange tint over say 10 years and it's going to turn into a rich dark brown. It won't affect the structural integrity of the wood though, it will always remain that strong. The black limba also has some orange streaks in there. That is caused by a rare fungus that grows inside certain trees. You'll see that as well in Manitoba maple, except that fungus will come out pink. So that fungus will remain in the wood as long as it is not exposed to UV light. Okay, so now I have the fretboard and the neck complete. I have to put a truss rod in between the two of them. So just to give you a quick idea, this truss rod is going to lay sandwiched in between the two pieces. It's going to be embedded into the neck. The reason this is important is there's a lot of tension on those strings that'll come down the neck that'll make it want to curl upwards. This truss rod is now a flat bar and an adjustable rod underneath this. So now I can adjust it and it can even out that bow on the guitar, and that's something that'll only get used maybe even 5 years down the line when the strength of the wood starts to deteriorate. So to put this in, you need to make sure that you snugly fit it inside this piece and leave it perfectly flush on top. It's plastic coated so that when I put the carpenter's glue in between the two pieces, it's not going to adhere to the steel members of the actual truss rod. Okay, so I could do the long stretch with the router, but I still have this wider section at the end. I'm gonna have to hand chisel that out. This is probably one of my least favorite steps, just to remove the bulk of the material, and it's gonna reduce how much shaping I have to do for the neck later on. So similar process to what I did with the guitar head, I just have my template in place and I'm going to transfer that image directly onto the guitar neck. Now this will be completed in 2 steps. I have the first section you just saw where I did the neck, and then I'm actually going to use the same template but tape it on the slope portion and repeat the exact same process to transfer over that image. I could make 2 separate templates, but this just made more sense and it was an easier process to put it all in one. So this step is to cut the angle on the neck that'll sit into the guitar head slot. Now this needs to be at a 4-degree angle coming down. So coming off the guitar head, you got a slope that the strings can now suspend over top. So just to make sure I don't put too much stress on the blade, I'm going to raise it approximately a 1/2 inch with every pass through until I cut off the section needed to be removed. Okay, so I'm going to finish shaping the 2 furthest extremes of the neck. Once I get those 2 to the exact dimensions, and I'll double check with my caliper, I'm then going to be taking passes the full distance back and forth so that I can make sure I have a smooth transition across the entire neck. So to get the rough shape of the neck on the 2 extremes, I'm going to be putting an approximately 45-degree slope using the Shinto rasp on either side with a flat section on top. Now, if you can imagine from the top of the neck to what I am removing the material, I'm going to leave approximately 1 centimeter before I use the sandpaper. By using the sandpaper, I can ensure that I have a proper radius that'll be perfectly symmetrical on both sides before I start to do that transitioning across the entire neck. Once I'm done with the Shinto rasp, going the entire length throughout, I'm going to use the same grit of sandpaper but a larger sheet so that I can have a larger surface area to ensure that my transitions will be more consistent than if I were to use a small sander where I would be, I'll say, not efficiently applying pressure across the entire guitar neck. So you can see where a bit of work early on with the templates is going to help you throughout the entire build. Now the same template that I used to construct the neck, I'm now going to be using for the fretboard. And if you imagine, the fretboard sits directly on the neck, so they should be perfect mirror images of one another. Okay, so for the fretboard, there is a radius that goes along the top. Now, I'm over exaggerating it. This is the actual radius. So how you transfer it from this block onto this piece is you set up a guide and you have your central markings on either side with your central marking on the block as well. You're then going to take sandpaper and you're just going to go across hundreds of times, I would say, until you see that you've evenly scratched the entire surface and you have that proper radius on your fretboard. Now that the radius is complete, I can mark out the fret locations on either side of the fretboard. Okay, so now I'm going to start the fret work. To do the fret work, I marked off the fret locations on the fretboard, and I'm going to be using a clamp along with a Japanese handsaw, and I'm going to put some tape along the teeth of the Japanese handsaw to let me know when to stop when I've hit that proper depth to allow the insert for the frets to sit inside. So just to show you what the process is going to look like, I'm just going to clamp this in the correct location, and then the Japanese handsaw will just come through here and score this to the proper depth, and I'll continue this process all the way down. So I accidentally forgot to press record on this part where I put two pieces of the black limba on the exterior of the fretboard. Now I'm going to have a perfect transition between the fretboard and the neck. Okay, so before I glue up the fretboard to the neck, I'm going to do a dry clamp, and I'm going to put 4 brass dowels in here. So I'm just going to drill right through right now so I have a perfect slot for the two to slide into one another. The problem is that if I do the glue up, it's going to act like a lubrication in between these two layers until the glue actually hardens. So this will shift unless I have those brass pins to hold it all in place. To hold the brass dowels in place, I'll be using a 5-minute epoxy, and to combine the fretboard and the neck, I'll just be using a standard carpenter's glue. Okay, so now I'm going to fit the guitar head to the guitar neck. Time for glue. Okay, so I skipped over how I made the bow nut, but the bow nut is just that little bridge at the end of the fretboard that's going to support the strings going across it. To complete that bow nut, I'm going to be scoring off the locations with the Japanese handsaw. Then I'll be using a triangular file just to give it a slot that the strings can set in. Similar to all my projects, I'm going to be sanding this guitar from 60 grit all the way up to 320 grit. Make sure that you score the entire guitar with a pencil to ensure that you have a consistent sand across. Okay, time for the sealer coat. Let's see how this thing looks with some finish. Now, it's hard not to get excited at this point, but one thing to keep in mind is the sealer coat is going to be sanded later. So this is not what the final product will look like, but you can start to get an idea of what you're dealing with. Good go. Okay, so I have a sealer coat on there right now, and all of the loose fibers are going to stand up as a result of the sealer coat. So I got a rough surface across the entire guitar. I'm going to take some 320 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to smooth everything down, and then that's going to prepare it for the lacquer finish. Now I'm working with a high gloss finish on this, so this is more tricky than a standard satin gloss. Ideally, you're going to wet the entire guitar in one pass through, and you're going to leave it there for 24 hours, and you're going to see how the wood has accepted the lacquer finish. If you do not like the results, you can sand and repeat this exact same process as many times as you like before you get the ideal finish. Now, if you made it this far in the video, my hope is that you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. And if you want to keep on seeing our videos, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. It really does help. We're going to be having a couple guitar builds coming up, a full-scale canoe build, and any other thing that comes into our mind along the way. But my sales pitch aside, this was one of the more difficult parts of the project, getting the frets installed into the guitar. Something I would suggest that I've learned near the end of that is after you score in those fret locations, use a file to put a taper on either side, and that's going to help the fret sit in place while you compress it into place. To file off the ends and do the final adjustments and sanding of the, and polishing, of the frets, just make sure that you have a lot of tape in between the finished guitar and the file. You don't want to risk scratching it at this late stage. So this is the final check. This project has been going on for a couple weeks. I just want to make sure that everything is still perfectly straight and that there was no warping in the wood. I'm then going to be placing a crown on all of the frets before I finish the polishing. Time to install all the components for this electric guitar. Now initially for the truss rod cap and for the pickup caps, I was just going to buy some plastic components, but with the guitar this nice, I had to do something else. So I constructed both of them out of Wenge. You'll see it at the end. It's a very small, easy process, but I think it adds a lot of value to the guitar. I know what you're thinking. It looks good, but how does it sound? All right.
There it is.
Yeah, I hear that now, the acoustic in there, yeah. Thanks for watching this video on how I put together this custom Les Paul style guitar. Now, I built this from scratch, and this is going to be submitted potentially for the Great Guitar Build-Off 2022. The voting will open up in a couple of months. I'll be sure to let everybody know through my Instagram and my YouTube page. Now, this is the second guitar I've built. If you want to see any upcoming builds I have, I'm going to be building some more guitars, canoes, furniture, whatever you can think of. Be sure to subscribe, hit that alert button, and of course, like this video.